Getting ready to roll. Thank you very much. I'd be a little quicker to get going if I saw our guest speaker. Ann, are you back at the getting coffee? Where's Ann McCormack? She's going to be. Oh, there we are, Ann. Good morning. Okay, I didn't want to introduce you and find you weren't in the room. I was. So anyway, good morning, Marilyn. My favorite national counselor, yes, exactly. So anyway, thank you, everyone. I think we had a great day yesterday. We, as you know, we managed to stay on schedule all day, and we intend to stay on schedule all day today. And we've got a full lineup of I think every bit as good a speakers as we had yesterday. So I think it's going to be a really interesting day, and we'll just get started with one of my favorite speakers and one of my favorite neighbors. So please welcome Ann McCormack.
He has to say I'm his favorite because we live so close together, so, yeah. Alrighty. I got the quick and dirty on how to work the clicker here, and now it doesn't seem to be working, David. How do I make, oh, okay.
We'll go back on.
Okay.
Another one. There you go.
All right, here we are. So this is not the title that Danny had given me either, but anyway, that's all right. This is how we roll here. Anyway, I'm so glad to see so many familiar faces and welcome other newcomers to the conference. I haven't had the privilege of attending every single one of these meetings, but quite a few of them, and I've always learned so much from the ones that we've been to. I think during COVID, well, before COVID, I think it was so great to just meet people and socialize, and then during COVID and now after, I think we've seen what each of us is really made of, and appreciate the courage that so many people in this very room have shown just by questioning the mainstream narrative. You know, so many issues have come up: travel, choices, bodily autonomy, and how these changing views and experience of mandates have shaped society and the experience of every one of you, from youth to elderly. This is what family is, right? It's the whole SWAT. I had an idea actually of opening up the discussion and asking people what solutions they have found over these last 2 years to get around the broken systems that I feel have failed our families. But I think upper management didn't seem to act on my idea. But that's all right. That's right. There's still, well, yeah, we'll see how the day goes. Maybe there's still time, yeah. Anyway, these last years, I think the direct effect of political, and, you know, I mean political, not scientific, ideas has had an acute and profound effect on Alberta families, and indeed most of the population of the world. And I think it's astounding that these effects on us have been international and nearly simultaneously affecting us. Anyway, I think it's obvious that to many of us here that those who oppose freedom also want to destroy the family unit. They vilify having faith in a supreme being, replacing that supreme being with themselves, not you or me, and most certainly teaching only their views on climate, philosophy, politics in schools, while diluting core academic subjects. And make no mistake, I think that civil and human rights must be eroded by this globalist agenda. It's planned. But I wonder too, like, once they've conquered the world, then what? Like, when they wake up on Monday morning after the world's been conquered, then what? Like, what do you do? But COVID and climate, I think the breakdown of the family are political tools for this purpose. There's a fellow in Ontario, Greg Hill, and he said many times that now is the time to show our faces and tell our stories about what we have personal knowledge of, and how effectively our institutions have been this last while, or ineffective our institutions have been in this while. So these are some of the institutions that I've been personally involved with over the last 2 years. No, these are some of the institutions. And many of us have, like, I'm up here talking probably not as an exception, but more as the rule. So how do these institutional failures relate to family and freedom? Well, I just intuitively we know that everything in the world comes down to mom and dad putting food on the table. That's why we get up in the morning, to put food on the table for our children. So myself, I trained and eventually worked as a pharmacist in our rural community near Lloydminster. Got married to a farmer, had kids, and then in 2012, our toddler Sam was killed in an accident on our farm. And I must have, it didn't feel like I left the farm for about 10 years. Like, I know I got up and went out and raised kids. Like, I know I did all that, but it didn't, honestly, it's such a catastrophic event that you don't have any perspective of how you spent your time during those years. So in that time, I let my license to practice pharmacy go and stayed home with our older kids, a son and a daughter. We have a small farm, we had a small construction company. My husband served as a municipal councillor for one term. So we were busy enough without having to drive around looking for babysitters and, while we went to work and all that kind of thing. We were really busy. In 2014, we were blessed with another daughter, Belle, and she was 5 years old during that first March when COVID hit. And I remember we'd gone on holidays and landed back in the Edmonton airport from Texas on March 10th. And then by March 17th weekend, the restrictions and school closures and everything had happened. We traveled through a total of 8 airports on that trip, including LAX and Vancouver, which was filthy, by the way. I'm sure the little kid was probably peeling gum off the bottom of chairs in the airport and eating it. Anyways, our entire family of 5 tested negative for COVID in those days after. And that was one of the only times our family ever tested for the virus. I mean, we were rural and isolated. It just didn't come up. And then, of course, school was done, right? So the following spring, I took a job just as an assistant at a pharmacy in a small town near us. And because by then it was too expensive. Like, I would have to attend in person at U of A to get my license back, and it didn't matter. I didn't need to. But it did feel so good to be back in the workforce again. And I absolutely loved my coworkers, and I loved our patients like family. That is the absolute truth, even if I wasn't making much money. I had replaced a person who was too scared of COVID to come and work near sick people. That's how strong the messaging was. So like so many other families that year, we decided to homeschool our youngest kid in that September 2020 for grade 1, because with our rural buses, she would have had to wear a mask from 7 in the morning till 5 o'clock at night. And we had a problem with that because she was only 6 years old. I mean, to send this little person, it wasn't worth it. We joked that if she turned out to be the dumbest kid in Clandonald due to our homeschooling, well, she had the rest of her life to catch up. It would be fine. But then the next year, too, the restrictions were still the same, except that our rural bus service was completely discontinued the day before school started. Which again, it didn't matter. Like we were on the farm. We had the luxury of a flexible schedule and time, and so we managed to homeschool her for grade 2. But despite our efforts, of course, she was really lonely. I mean, her older sister was 16. So anyway, the 16-year-old, our eldest daughter, had changed schools prior to COVID anyway, so she could travel doing competitive sports. So she had several athletic opportunities that had presented themselves. So she was already doing online work and work at your own pace and whatever, and that worked fine. But when COVID hit, she was suddenly without all these athletic opportunities, but had pushed herself anyways to graduate at the age of 17, and she was actually valedictorian. We were very proud of her. I have to put that little plug in. But we couldn't attend her graduation. Her graduation ceremony, by the way, was the day after the story broke about Premier Jason Kenney and his patio party. There was Kenney, Chandro, Nixon, and Taves living the good life with their Jameson party and all that. But for us, with the terrible Wi-Fi and internet at the farm, we had to get dressed up, go to town, sit in the car with a laptop, and hope we had enough reception to catch the Zoom ceremony. We were literally parked on the street in front of the school, while on the other side of that wall, the graduation ceremony was taking place. And we're not alone. This happened all over the country, all over the world, but in our community. So like so many other Alberta families, I'm sure. Anyways, I phoned our MLA's office and I was furious with the frustration of it. I'm frankly so furious still that I can barely talk about it without swearing. Our provincial government abused us. Those landmark ceremonies will never come again. Our daughter's high school sports scholarships, U18 competitions will never come again. The social opportunities for the kids at that age will never be made up for. So now the story of our son, Jack. Jack was in junior high when COVID hit, and he seemed to have what he called the best summer he could ever imagine. School was done by March 17th, all summer, no problem. Wasn't going to start up again until September, maybe. Jack was good at school, but he was really saddened. There was time, we had one social studies teacher that would send home like Desmog blog. I don't know if Michelle Stirling's here, she'll certainly know about Desmog blog, about how human climate change was killing polar bears and all the other guilt trips that are so burdensome for kids. And then the last weekend in August before school was to start, Jack killed himself in our home. He was 14. The mandates were expected to be enforced again, and there'd be no certainty about whether school was going to stay open or start or stop or what. There was just no frame of reference for these kids to go forward. The principal of the school never came to our funeral, despite the fact that he's married to our husband's first cousin, but the staff did send flowers, you know. Keep in mind that in our rural area, our kids were related to 17 staff members at that school and over 30 students. But I had spoken up against the climate change, sustainable development goals and issues. I'd questioned the mandates. And just to clarify, so Jack's death was at the beginning of the same year that our daughter had her Zoom graduation, so that girl missed all those rites of passage as well as facing the loss of her second brother. And it's not humanly possible, even here, for me to communicate the loathing that I feel for our political representatives who couldn't be bothered to comment at the time, despite our family's desperation and pain. Despicable. Despicable. Jack's funeral, so the church is another institution, of course. Jack's funeral was limited to only a handful of people. And although this was more than what the church had originally allowed, we were devastated, and the Catholic Church their family attended for generations went beyond the provincial COVID mandates. So we had people in authority going beyond obsessive restrictions. So we had to fight for 30 people to go to the funeral mass. But this is how silly it was, because farm, right? We had 250 people at our home. And through the week, I have no idea, but on the day of the funeral, we had at least 200, a big Irish Catholic family, right? 250 people at our house. I can't even keep track of how many people were there through the week. But those 30 of us, I left the funeral planning meeting with the priest because I was so frustrated for him, so I'm assuming I've got a date with purgatory that's probably longer. Anyway, we had 30 people that were allowed to attend the funeral mass. They came to the farm to be with us. Then we all got in our cars and went to the church, just the 30 people, and then they all came back to the farm for visiting, of course. One couple who showed up at the church, they were just going to sit outside on the bench. I mean, it was August or early September, and you know, the weather was good. They were just going to sit outside and pray for us. But I said, this is ridiculous. Come in and be with us. Come in and be with us. So, although the whole thing's a bit of a shocking blur, I do remember that the priest, who didn't want us to even honor the passing of our beloved son, wanted us to just capitulate and follow the mandates, was certainly brave enough to face all those horrible germs. He showed up for the free lunch at the farm, and you know, like, he was welcome. But I mean, why were there germs at our place or germs at the church and not at our house, right? Anyway. So my husband has returned to Mass regularly, and I haven't got the stomach for it yet. This is not a reflection of my faith. I just that, you know, there's so many things around our home. It's only been 2 years, right, since we lost Jack. I've got this old 1952 International Harvester truck that I always love, and I always thought that would be Jack's someday, because he'd be 16 now. And I love that old truck, but I am sad when I drive it. Anyway, somehow we went through another COVID season of fall and winter and finally spring. And I was still working at a little pharmacy, and, you know, had my friends and, you know, a lot of support. Anyway, Jason Kenney's mandates and the snitch line were still on the Alberta Health Services website. And I know because despite having a medical exemption to wearing masks, an anonymous complaint was filed against me and my job ended on April 29th, 2020. So I called the college, so there's another institution, I called the college to discuss how my life was now turned upside down. But the college was on work from home. So this is an office building. This isn't a, you know, a hospital or a pharmacy. This is just the bureaucrats, right? So when I phoned begging them for help to see reason and keep my job, there was no answer. Their unconstitutional mandates had devastated me, and they didn't even have to answer the phone to justify them. When finally did call me back from there, I envisioned them, you know, still sitting in bed with a bag of Cheetos and a laptop. You know, they didn't even have to get dressed to face me in person when they nonchalantly destroyed that part of my life. Anyway, and I know that snitch line was still being used months later because I called it to report Kenney and Nixon and Taves and Chandro when I saw them enjoying themselves and ignoring their own rules, but I never did hear back. But anyway, 19 months later, I'm still fighting my wrongful dismissal. I've been through the institution of the Human Rights Commission, the Alberta Human Rights Commission. I've waited so long that with 4 other cases in the province with similar COVID-related claims, that my legal counsel actually put a letter in the Western Standard saying that, we're getting passed over. The lawyer seemed to notice that other cases were moving forward, but ours, all to do with mandates, all with legal representation, because they were throwing the non-legal ones out just immediately, and most with expert testimony might be getting, might be getting put on the bottom of the pile. And the delay is bad enough, but further to this issue is that we've had, when there's an incident, you only have 2 years to plead your case in the courts. But this has been tied up for 19 months already, and you can't do both at the same time. So not, right or wrong, not only is the Alberta Human Rights Commission ignoring us, they're taking away our right to fight, down another avenue. It's delay tactics. They're wishing we would go away. So I also filed a claim of professional misconduct through the College of Pharmacy, another institution, this one that, they're still in bed in the morning, against the pharmacy manager who told me I could no longer work despite knowing my exemption. And when the college refused to make a judgment on that issue because he was following their advice, even though I think in the back of their minds they know that it's unconstitutional, they just refused to do anything about it. I then asked the Alberta Ombudsman to intervene because they police these colleges, which they did, actually, and they worked very quickly. I was shocked. So, unfortunately, despite me begging for assistance, the college did make a decision. It was the wrong decision. It was an unconstitutional decision, and I've appealed it. But this is an ongoing dispute as well. It was supposed to be done October 26th, a couple weeks ago, but it looks like I'll be paying my lawyer till November 22nd at least for that one. Anyway. But government mandates gave employers carte blanche to destroy people's lives. And it just is, they didn't even have to face us to do it. Like they were this faceless entity behind a keyboard that was manipulating our homes and our lives. I feel like I asked for help and I was patted on the head and put aside. Anyway, Premier Smith has apologized for the government's role in the COVID vaccine discrimination, but it goes beyond that. Anyone who questioned the narrative was considered a conspiracy theorist or tinfoil hatter. There's a lot of academics that did a lot of shushing. And, apologies, I think, are hollow, and they're just a waste of our emotional energy unless they're acted upon. So it's great to apologize and say, well, give me another chance, give me a job at the ledge, but, we are here saying that we want to witness this action. Justice needs to be done, but justice needs to be seen to be done, too. So at work, too, to go back a little bit, I did ask about informed consent. I said, what do you say when people ask about the long-term safety effects of the new COVID vaccine? Because it was new then. It was brand new. And the response I got from a smart, well-educated, lovely, well-meaning, community-minded person was, that's how we do things now. Someone told me it takes 3 years to get a new lipstick approved in Canada, and we were injecting people 6 months after having a brand new technology. And what about the risk of blood clots, I stupidly asked, and other side effects? The answer was from the same person, who I admire greatly, I really do. So what? Blood clots can be treated. What? Anyway, so yeah, a shocker that, I'd get targeted, right? Anyway, there are those of us, there are lots who just want to forget and move on, and those who will apologize and expect us to move on, and even demand amnesty. So these institutions that I've, skipped through fairly quickly here, there's always been burdens and stresses on the family unit. But I think now families are being pressured to release themselves from life itself through MAID. On top of day-to-day pressures on the family unit to stay cohesive, families have now suffered from the pressures of opposing views regarding vaxes and other mandates, new mandates, how to care for the elderly population. They're treating children as vectors, damaging previously strained relationships already. And I think the only solution to this, because I'm standing here, racking my brains after fighting for 2 years, the only solution is to respect for the individual has got to be common teaching in our schools, and it's got to be demanded by our culture. I don't see any other way. That's a foundational thing. We must value our children, our elderly, ourselves. I've got a paragraph here about government, but holy God, I don't know. Parliamentary system, the whole thing, it was designed to fail as far as I'm concerned. I mean, Krista Freeland last week or 2 weeks ago or whatever thought, she pulls down $250,000 in wages a year and plus perks, right? But she wants us to stop Disney Plus channel, as if we had it to start with. We can't afford Disney Plus. Anyways, to help all us dumb parents balance our household budgets, and people have taken pretty good, well-deserved shots at that. But it reminds me of this joke. A man from Ireland goes to a pub and orders 3 shots of whiskey. And the barman asks, well, would it be better to put all 3 shots in one glass? He says, oh, no. I've got 2 other brothers back home, so, when I come to the pub, I have one for myself and one for each of them. Well, one week the man comes in and he only orders 2 shots of whiskey. And the barman says, oh, no, did something happen to your brothers at home? Oh, no, says the Irishman. No, I've just decided to quit drinking. Well, this is Krista Freeland, right? They pretend to give something up. And as Neil Oliver says, having never known one moment of discomfort themselves. We feel the loss, and Trudeau gives away money and pays bills so that we don't have to, right? So as I have to agree with Paul, the only solution is a new constitution. There are all kinds, I'm not going to go through all this. If you feel like reading it, you can. But there's experts who are common sense, who have offered solution after solution after solution to defend the professional societies that they represent and what they've pledged their life to make good in their career at. And I don't believe that we're taking their advice. One of the expert witnesses in Alberta here, this is not from Alberta, but he says, Schaefer says, he's an OH&S person. He says, his own testing showed that within 2 minutes, mask wearers had oxygen levels so low and carbon dioxide levels so high that if such conditions were present in a natural work environment, occupational health and safety standards would require that workplace to shut down, with employees barred from returning unless they had a suitable breathing apparatus. So again, Premier Smith has promised to reform AHS by cleaning house and changing the staffing, and has promised not to lock down again. But where do we get our trust back for our institutions our medical institution, our pharmacy, our hospital institutions? Informed consent has got to be reinstated. And I will say again publicly, Alberta pharmacists billed Alberta Blue Cross $25 per injection. They did not pay for that. Those injections were paid through tax dollars. So I guess in one state they did. And this, when I asked about informed consent, that was the answer that people were getting. Well, this is how we do things now. So how do we trust them again? And I think this man's point number 10 with his advice is the only solution is a complete revolution in healthcare and medicine, a complete cleanup of our corrupted system, and people at the top who keep putting the patient and true health of the country last. Alberta Health Services hired social media influencers to promote vaccine and segregation of our Alberta society, our family. I'm sure they did, and I know this was standard procedure probably across the country, but Alberta did this, and that is who we are responsible to and who we must take to task. And they could have been considered militarized too, because when they went to these churches, they had armed police with them. And they're certainly politicized, if not militarized. And just recently too, in the last couple of weeks, we found out that park wardens can now enter any premises without warrant. And I think this is, a carryover of the overreach. You become very bold when you get away with it once. So now we've got climate law enforcement. Colleges of medicine and pharmacy, they ignored the Supreme Law or Charter in favor of their mandates, which they assumed would take precedence over all. The hubris of these people. So even though I am battling, I have my battle with the College of Pharmacy, if I win, it's just a moral win, right? I don't get my legal fees back, I don't get damages, I don't win a prize, except for being right. And if I lose, the precedent is set, and I may have done more harm than good by challenging the status quo. As I say, our churches locked us out in the time of need. They went for virtual communion. Come on. At the end of October, just a couple of weeks ago, former Secretary of State and CIA Director Mike Pompeo made the note that religious freedoms are the cornerstone of all other freedoms. And I have to agree with this, whether you're agnostic or atheist or anything, we must see that elevating one human being's status as supreme over another for these, they are superficial reasons. I was wrestling with myself over using that word, but they are. It results in a set of rules for some, while others don't have to follow the rules. And this is tyranny. It ignores that each human life is sacred, unique, and worth protecting. And religion, like our organized religions with all their failings and wins, are being replaced with the COVID cult or the climate cult. We need something to believe in. Our police, while everybody can, take a kick at that cat, I think, our police have got to serve and protect Albertans. They cannot be beholden to Brenda Lukey and Justin Trudeau. I mean, we all say that all the time. But with the institution of our police failing, we're seeing vigilantism. Like in Lloydminster, we had 3 crack houses burned down through arson, all sort of at the same time. But I mean, people had begged police to come and clean up these neighborhoods over and over again. Where we live in Clandonald, our fire and first responders are volunteer. And I think we have to preserve that tradition in our area. They do an excellent job. There are neighbors. If there's a fire at my farm and we call them, we know that we better help because somebody else will have a fire someday and we'll be there for them as well, right? Media, who do you trust? I've got pages and pages about media, but I won't bore you with that. But with C11, it's great to say, well, I support independent media, but what if we don't know where they are? Like, how do we find them to support them with C11? This is just really, really troublesome to me. People like Andrew Lawton, who's just arrived, I'm just delighted that he wrote his book, because reading that at the same time as the inquest into the Ottawa convoy, it just shows his integrity in recording the facts without putting a spin on it. Anyway, how are you supposed to support independent media with C11 if they're hidden? I thought this was interesting too. Retailers like the Institution of Shopping. Well, it's a competitive sport to some of us, but anyways, Safeway. We were locked out, and so all that happened was that we were made to compete with, Amazon and make Jeff Bezos money, right? But this is a Lloydminster Safeway. It's part of the shopping mall. It's got 2 large doorways, which I've indicated with my finger arrow there on my phone, my high tech. Anyways, they had 2 large doors to get people in and out. But during the mandates, they put everyone through the same door. The one on the left was closed, and still is closed, actually. And I thought, well, you're increasing the traffic, right? You got people going both ways, coming in and out at the same time, but then they put those helpful little arrows down on the floor, right, to direct traffic, keep everybody walking in the same direction to keep us safe. But the door policy always did kind of puzzle me, so I phoned them up the other day and I asked, well, why did you do that? And they said it was because they had to hire security guards to make sure people wore masks, sanitized, and social distance. So it wasn't for health, it was to police us. But they only wanted to pay security guards at one entrance. They didn't want to pay for both doors, right? So they were also required to have separate washrooms for the staff and customers, but there was only 2 little washrooms in the whole store, so they put men and women in one, customers in one tiny bathroom, and male and female staff in the other. And grocery stores in particular are a great barometer of all kinds of issues, right? The climate change, do you get plastic bags, paper bags, no bags? Like, what are you supposed to do? Their security is obviously not about health, but about watching us. Save on Foods, I went to Save on Foods during COVID in Edmonton, and I wasn't allowed to buy the meat, enough meat for our household. So they are a barometer of our whole society, like the variety and the amount of food available, inflation here at the gas pump. I mean, this is something worth watching, which we all do, but now I've put it in print, so it's official, right? The things that are not available are also very telling. Children's cough and cold remedies have been very short. And I fear that kids will receive adult doses on things like Tylenol or cold medication, just because these children's forms of things are quite scarce. This can be dangerous. I was going to talk about Canada Post, but I don't think we need to talk about Canada Post. We'll just say, hey, how about Alberta Post next time around? The travel issues, I don't know, I have no idea how I'm doing for time. I'm just... Okay, well, we'll just skip the travel mandates. We'll leave that to Maxime Bernier and Honorable Brian Peckford. School, we started our own school. This year, our youngest kid was in school for the very first time in her life. She's 8 years old. People, just a bunch of parents got together and we rented the Streamstown Hall and one of the ringleaders is a woman named Deanna Franklin, a mom and a board member, and she just researched curriculums. This is one way around one of the institutions that I feel failed us before. We're doing it ourselves. It's called Shine Christian Academy. They do 139 days, and that's the whole school year, and 4 days a week. We do have challenges. Challenges, of course, are funding and transportation. There's no busing, but we get our kids there. And it is an accredited curriculum. And why we did it was we just thought the threat of vax clinics in Alberta schools, the mistrust of schools by parents, we were scared that the school would make medical decisions for children without the consent of parents. That was on our mind because it happened. It happened in Australia. They did. Hundreds and hundreds of kids were vaccinated without parental consent. I do have a note about banking, with the frozen bank accounts. We don't trust the banking institutions, and people have tried like crypto and different currencies. Maybe some people have got a bucket of gold, let me know who you are, under your bed, or silver. People are buying real estate because they don't trust our fiat currency, but I'm certainly not an expert on that. Anyway, the result of this erosion of our institutions will have the effect on us of poverty. Impoverished and hopelessness in our youth and our elderly and our working age people. And hopelessness is considered sinful because it leads to despair, and which leads to loss of life itself. When life is no longer considered sacred or valuable in itself. So I've got a note about societal breakdown and amnesty even. So Tyler Shandro was our Minister of Health, and he's now our Minister of Justice, who's going to examine the actions of himself as Minister of Health. So this does not sound like a solution to me. As far as I'm concerned, Shandro has been granted amnesty. He should enjoy that amnesty. Why? Well, obviously, right? But my son is still dead, my job complaint is still unresolved, and if I was evil enough to cause these life catastrophes to our MLA, our Premier, our Prime Minister, or my previous employer, would I be granted amnesty for my actions? Or are we not all equal under the law? So I go back to Paul's speech yesterday. I did write this before I heard you. I didn't just copy it, but anyway. But we need a defensible constitution that protects the smallest minority, the individual. We need a solution of hope, not despair, because as we know, despair leads to death, physical, spiritual, economic, everything. And without hope, I know this is brilliant, right? Without hope, we are hopeless. What do I know about protecting our family as a building block of society and our home post-COVID? All I know is that the battle that we are waging against those who prefer lawlessness and subsequent amnesty is still more honorable than the peace resulting from just going along to get along. And that's it.
Yeah, she deserves that, yes. She absolutely deserves a standing ovation. Thank you very much. And when I get looking at the agenda, which I don't know who made this up, we have these sections, and then we have a space for question and answer following the session. And I just noticed that when Ann said, well, you can ask me a question later, I looked at the agenda and I thought, well, when are we going to do that? But as luck would have it, between 12 and 12:45, we're planning on honoring Tim Ball and Kevin Avram, but Kim Purdy was one of the people that sort of led the charge on that, and she's had a family tragedy. Like life just, there's always these, she's had a family tragedy that isn't here, so we have a little bit of room in that. So we'll have clearly, Scott, you have a question, but we're not going to take the question and answer right now. We'll have, or could we take one? No, go ahead. Okay, go ahead. It's got to be really short because we want to stay on schedule. Betty, go ahead. No, just say them.
What do they do?
Check. Yep. What do they do after they conquer the world?
they will continue to merge themselves with the matrix of things and continue to roll out the transhumanist agenda with those who are left alive. That's all recorded.
I think that's a pretty reasonable comment. So, and just like I say, we'll get to a question and answer for all others. We have Ann and we have John Hilton O'Brien, we have Nadine and Michelle Stirling this morning, and then we'll have a Q&A like just after lunch. And so in any event, without further ado, our next speaker is John Hilton O'Brien from Parents for Choice in Education. So good morning, John, and it's your turn.
Thank you, Danny. It's good to be here. Let me just get my notes out here. All right, so I want to talk about three things with you. I want to talk about the ideas very briefly that we're seeing going on. I want to talk about some of the structures of power in education right now, and I want to talk about what we can do with it. So let's just start with some of the ideas, and I'm going to skip over it because I studied more philosophy in school than is probably good for me, and I could probably go on for about 50 hours. So I'm not gonna. So we're just going to stick to the basics. Here's what you need to know about critical theory in general. The idea underlying it is this. When you're working with people as a helping professional, like a social worker or a teacher, you do not want to duplicate the oppressive power structures that people may have been part of. So if you're a social worker working with somebody who's been in an abusive relationship, you don't want to be in a position where you've got all the power and she has none, because that's what she's leaving. So the whole point to critical theory was this. We should examine how our relationships work in terms of power with people. And we should be clear about that. And the point is to make sure that people who are powerless have power in those relationships. So what on earth happened in our schools? It's a serious question. Why is it that we're seeing educational professionals, or not even the professionals, the unions really, and the bureaucrats, with all the power? What's happened? When a teacher says to her class, that's mostly white kids, she says, "You're privileged and you should give up your power." She's the only person in the room to receive that power. She's taking power away, not giving it to them. And this is exactly the opposite of what critical theory was meant to do. And the same sort of thing happens when we talk about gender theory. The upshot of gender theory in our schools is that we shouldn't have to tell the parents anything about important events in their kids' lives. And what I'm going to tell you is that we shouldn't pay attention to the underlying ideas. We should pay attention to that effect, that transfer of power, because that's what's important here. So if you go on the ATA's website, one of the things you'll find is a little document talking about how in loco parentis, that's last century. Nowadays, teachers work in parens patriae, so no longer in the place of the parents, but in the place of the state. And that's a very significant move. And what we're seeing here is political pornography. We have powerful people who are exploiting the image of the vulnerable in order to get more power for themselves. So, in the United Kingdom, they had this reforming education minister called Michael Gove, who talked about the blob, the educational the educational industry as a whole. And when he called it the blob, he was likening it to that old science fiction classic, where you've got this monster that's just a blob that expands to devour everything in its path. And he's not entirely wrong. So, oh yes, and one more. There we go. Sure, makes sense. See if I care. Very good. So what you have is a set of interlocking interests. Okay, you've got the bureaucrats at the local level and the bureaucrats at the provincial level. When education expands, when there's new programs or requirements, as a manager, you get to hire more people. And when you do, of course, your pay rate goes up because you have more reports. The faculties of education get more grant money the more extreme things get. They get lots more papers. As they get more appearances to push their agendas, they get more notoriety, and that is more power, more prestige, and more money. And of course, the teachers' unions across Canada, not teachers, also get money. You know, it's a funny thing. We spend $12,000 a year per student in Alberta. That's last year. When you look at a typical classroom of 25 students, that's $300,000 for a classroom. The teacher's only getting about $75,000 of that. So the truth is that the unions aren't benefiting the teachers that much either, but union leadership is getting quite powerful. And so they make a lot out of that stake. So this year we had some school board elections across the country, and I tracked a couple of them. So in British Columbia, we saw this series of overlapping union endorsements. You know, you'd have the labor councils endorsing people, they'd provide lists. Teachers' unions would provide lists. So there was the situation in Chilliwack was pretty famous for this. And if you look at Chilliwack, about 1 person in 4 who actually voted would have been a union member. They had 1,800 members of the teachers' union, and it only took 7,100 people to elect a school board trustee, and it was an at-large election. So that same block could possibly elect the entire slate. So 1,800 was just the teachers, and all the other unions endorsed the same people and got their people out to vote. They should have swept it. Somehow some conservatives crept in there, and that was partly due to an organization allowed under BC's new laws that allow for municipal political parties. But the sheer anger from parents is the only thing that kept the teachers from completely sweeping that board. Okay. In Ontario, I tracked a handful of boards, some 15 boards. The Ontario Secondary Schools Teachers Federation, they endorsed 88 candidates for those boards, elected 58 of them, and resulted in complete control in places like Toronto. And if you think about that, that's $1 billion budget for Toronto alone. That's a lot of power and money that the union now controls. And they have effective control of all those 15 boards. And that's just the ones I measured. I also observed that there were various Catholic boards, and there were other boards that I wasn't tracking for which there were union endorsements. In essence, the most successful political party in Canada today is a teachers' union. Okay? In Alberta, last year, the ATA spent $1.1 million on third-party advertising. To get the same effect, you would have had to see an American military contractor commit $1.7 billion in the U.S. midterm elections. That's the equivalent, right? All the third-party advertisers in the United States donated short of $2 billion. So we're looking at a lot of money. And they're doing it through loopholes, right? The ATA has this thing in their terms of reference that they're not allowed to endorse anybody. But we're currently a two-party state. When you attack the Conservatives, you're supporting the NDP. Strangely enough, the NDP's fundraising jumped by about $1.5 million last year. Wonder if these two events are related. And of course, the Calgary Labour Council put $1.7 million into electing a slate of trustees and municipal council candidates and a mayor last year's election. By the way, Alberta Municipalities doesn't actually have a central website where they track third-party spending. It was more or less luck that I stumbled on the Calgary Labour Council's spending. Somebody else had mentioned it in an article, and it was on the City of Calgary's site. We do not have any way of finding out how much the Alberta Teachers Association spent on the actual school board races last year. It could be considerably north of 1.1 million. But there is a common thread. Okay, from coast to coast, we see endorsements, right? In the ATA's case, they can't make it direct. That's the job of the Labour Council. We also see anti-hate websites. One was spreaded up by the Vancouver Labour Council in BC, specifically to attack non-union candidates. And it's just about fighting hate. And there's considerable amounts of dark money, right? That Ontario Teachers Union, it was also active in the provincial elections this spring, and they were suing the government of Ontario, which had sought to limit the amount of third-party spending that a group could do to a mere $600,000, and they wanted to exceed that. And that was in the provincial election, not directly onto school boards where they were most concerned. There's a lot of money there. So this is depressing, isn't it? The school boards, the teachers' associations are running the tables in election. So let's talk about what we can do about it. Or more to the point, what we are doing about it. So the first thing is an idea. Government-run school, or a Catholic government-run school, a charter school, an independent school, a francophone school, or home education. These are the things we're teaching, so we have a common ground for discussion. That's what makes public education public, not that the government is running it. So educational pluralism means that we don't care who's running the school, right? So things like vouchers are part of that. Alberta's system of charter and so-called private schools are part of that. And when we do that, when we go more into educational pluralism, we're defunding the blob so that they aren't getting all their needs met by having this one single pot of money for them to control. And that takes some of the incentive for the blob to control education away from the blob, at the same time that it reduces its power. So educational pluralism is an important policy choice for any sort of conservative government. And that is part of the reason, I suspect, that our current premier has committed to following educational pluralism. We also do classic advocacy work at Parents for Choice in Education. We've got a website. It's got all sorts of resources that you can use if you need to advocate for your child. We write columns, we put them into the Western Standard, the Epoch Times, and who knows, maybe someday the mainstream media will see fit to publish us. Well, one of the things it does is it creates friction, right? It makes it harder to exploit the image of vulnerable people to take power away from you. And it really works partly by this one thing. When you've got a teacher saying, well, you know, we're trying to privilege the or we're trying to give more power to these sexual minorities, you say, hey, I get that, I'm all for it, but I feel like you're taking power away from me, and you've already got all the power in this relationship. And when you do that, you're going into the core of their argument. You're going into critical theory itself and turning it back on them. So this makes it much harder for them to exploit you and to exploit the vulnerable people. And we also need to advocate to the government for changes that will make the union's political work harder. Perhaps we should limit the amount of third-party advertising that a union can do during elections and non-election years. Maybe the $275,000 that they're officially allowed to spend during the provincial election is a bit too much. Maybe 1.1 million in a non-provincial election year was over the top. Maybe we should do something about that. I don't think the government will have too much time once they begin to understand more fully what's at stake. We also need to do some political work. So last year, I trained and equipped some people to run for school board trustee. So 12 of those people were candidates. There were a bunch of people who were running on campaigns. Out of the 12 who ran for school board trustee, 4 of those got elected, and I'm happy with that. That's pretty good for a first run out the gate. We need to do more, right? In 3 years, there's going to be another school board election. Now, if someone who's going to be a candidate in the school board election 3 years from now spends that time talking about, say, vaccines, when it comes time for the election, doesn't matter how right or smart they are, they're going to be questioned about vaccines. All their time in talking is going to be spent defending what they've said about vaccines, and they're never going to have a chance to talk about education during the school board election. We need what we call message discipline in politics. We need to find people right now, convince them that they should run for trustee, and they should start talking about education and nothing else for 3 years. It's important. At the same time, we need to start now to train people who will be campaign managers in 3 years and volunteer coordinators, put them together with those people who will be candidates, and have them work on the provincial election. I don't care what party they work for, as long as they get some experience working together. We also have a campaign in a box. We've assembled some of the cheapest tools in Canada. We can do a complete political campaign for someone for $3,500. And anybody who's ever run a campaign knows that that is absurdly cheap, but it's doable. Right down to the desk, to the doorstep application on your phone that plugs it straight into the database. So that's what we're working on doing right now. So you can find out more. You can see some of the starting to get rather large number of columns that we've written on our website. They all come up there eventually. It takes a week or so lead time. We keep a mailing list for folks. So we make people who sign up for the mailing list get all the information. But you can go and check it out online. How are we doing for time, Danny? Am I out of time, or do we have time for a question?
No, I think we're basically out of time. We'll try and take some questions, as I say, at lunchtime, okay?
Sounds good.
Thank you kindly. Well, you're right on time.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so now we are going to take a 20-minute break, and then we'll come back with Nadine Ness at 10:15. So here we go. 20-minute break. Start the timer, David, for our break. here we are. Well, we're rolling right along. Let's stay on schedule. Here's one of my new best friends, and her father-in-law is one of my old best friends. But in any event, Jim Ness just got here. Our friend Michael Binion from the Modern Miracle Network just got here, who's, as you know, sponsored our last conference, and so it's our friends are rolling in. So Nadine, she's going to tell us how to. Well, I guess the title we have, I thought we called it "Shaping the Future" with. I don't know how this agenda gets made up, because what I think of, they don't speak about it anyway. It was too long. That's right. So here's Nadine Ness from Unified Grassroots. Welcome, Nadine.
Yeah. Well, I'm not using the.
Okay. Oh, I see. Okay, good.
Yeah. We're gonna spice things up. I'm gonna sit down. So, I sit down because I have a fainting condition, and certain things can make it worse when I get warm or when fight or flight gets activated. So how I describe it is I'm basically a fainting goat. So you scare me or something that kind of activates that fight or flight, I may go down. So that's why I'm not a police officer anymore. It's also why I keep bugging my husband. I want to get some fainting goats just so I can feel a little less alone. So this is something I've been battling for a little bit, but lately it's gotten a lot better. And I haven't fainted in a really long time, but today could be the day. The last thing we need, though, is me to faint and everyone go, "Is she vaccinated?" We all know we've done it, right? Anytime we've seen someone faint, we're like, "It was the shot." It's not the shot. I've had it long before COVID. But anyways, a little bit about me. I'm a medically retired police officer. I worked for the federal government before. I've been in the system. I've seen how dysfunctional it is and how wasteful it is. And I'm married to a wonderful, wonderful man who's a doctor, but more importantly, a farmer. I think he wants to go back to that. I'm married into a freedom fighting family. My father-in-law is Jim Ness, one of the original freedom fighters in Canada. He fought against the Wheat Board, went to jail. Yeah. I think there's a few of them in here today. So I didn't know. I knew I was married into that, but I didn't know how useful it was going to become when I got thrown into it, and my husband, who's a doctor, was all on board with it. You would think it'd be the opposite, but he saw what his father did, and he knew no matter how hard it gets, you stand for what's right. And you, even if it's not the popular thing to do, you still do what's right. So with that being said, I'm the president and founder of Unified Grassroots. I'll explain to you a little bit how that came about, and then I'll go talking about what we can do. So Unified Grassroots started, I'll be completely honest with you guys, when COVID came, I was what we call COVIDiot. We saw what was happening out of Italy, and I remember my husband and I talking and thinking, oh, this is going to be really bad. And at one point, when Trudeau sold all of our masks, or sent it all to China, I thought, we're going to be in really rough shape here. At one point, I even made a video on how to create a mask using paper towel and elastics. So that's how far gone I had been. And so let this kind of be an example for you guys. There's no one that's too far gone that we can't reach. So within a few weeks, we started seeing the numbers. We started seeing how we shouldn't be afraid. And looking back, like that fight or flight was definitely activated. And I wasn't thinking clearly. I wasn't thinking at all. And now thinking back on how I even did a video like that, I laugh inside because I can't believe how far gone I had been. But it was just a matter of a few weeks, and I think having a faith in God and Him grounding me and Him humbling me and letting me know I didn't need to be afraid and giving me that faith kind of woke me up really quickly. So with that being said, that was early to 2021. So last fall, the school announcements came, or they had said they weren't going to be putting any mandates. And a week before school started, someone posted on a town page, "When's the next school board meeting?" And I'm like, oh no, don't tell me they've announced that they're bringing everything back. So I messaged this lady who posted, and at that point in time, like, you're so afraid to ask, hey, are you on my side? You know the attack's gonna come. So I just private messaged her. I said, are you like for or against it? She's like, I'm against it. I'm like, oh, okay, me too. And I said, we should do a presentation on the negative effects. So I'll just give you a little bit of background. I have children. I have 4. And one of them struggles a lot with OCD. And you can just imagine the environment that she went into, how hard it would have been. Everything we taught her not to fear, not to obsess over, now the school was now teaching her that was normal. And it just elevated the anxiety and stuff to the point where by the end of the school year, I never know how much detail I should give, but it gives you a context on how much I'm willing to fight. By the end of the school year, they told me she was medium to high risk of suicide. And I thought, what have we done to our kids? She was 11 at the time. So when they announced everything back, I'm like, we can't sit here. My husband's career was on the line. We know what they do with doctors who speak out. But at the same time, she was more important than all of that. So I messaged that lady. I said, let's do a presentation on the negative effects of the mandate. Everyone's focusing on COVID, but nobody's focusing on everything else. And I said, let's meet at my house. I started a Facebook group. It was private by word only. I said, invite the few parents that reach out to you, the few you know. And within 24 hours, we had 850 parents within our school division join that Facebook group. What I thought I was going to be alone, maybe 2 or 3, we had 850. And then within 2 more days, we were at 2,500 people. So I quickly erased my address from that Facebook group. And then we ended up renting a hall. About 300 people showed up. And we formed a nonprofit organization, which was at the time called Grassroots Concerned Parents. We did a presentation in front of the school board. It actually was received really well. They ended up implementing some change. We're still working on it. We know how long it takes, but one of the changes is putting policy in place so that the parents are back at a place where they have a voice, where the board is not just a financing approving board, but a governing authority board versus the division just doing whatever they want. So we're seeing steps in that direction. And not only that, it was received so well that even some MLAs shared our presentation, which is surprising considering it kind of went against the narrative. So, but with that said, doctors reached out to us, nurses reached out to us because they knew my husband was a doctor, and they were concerned as well. So they figure, oh, she's a safe one to reach out to. So we ended up forming a group for the doctors for the province, doctors and nurses. We ended up doing a letter to the province, kind of like Alberta, BC had done. And out of that, we needed a platform to put all of that, so that's where Unified Grassroots was born. And that same concept was used with other professions. So we had teachers reaching out. So we formed a group for teachers. We had mine workers reaching out. We formed a group for mine workers. And then we ended up having 40 different groups within their profession now fighting against their unions that wasn't representing them. So you're a much stronger voice when you have 100, 200, 300 people fighting together than one. Someone used an example once at an event I was at. He grabbed a stir stick, a wood one, and he broke it. And then he grabbed 100 and asked the lady to break it, and she couldn't. So that same concept we did on a massive scale. So our group, even though we weren't like a protest type group, our group grew throughout the province without even trying, just by word of mouth. So, and it was extremely effective because people had a strong voice. Now, we were at a point where like, okay, what's next? I don't know if you guys believe where your beliefs are in God or not, but I know when I was thrown into this, I wasn't even close to being equipped to dealing with it. I'm still not. So I had to heavily lean on God to lead me through it. And I remember praying one night, God, what's next? What's next? He woke me up at 2 o'clock in the morning that I needed to do a video to Scott Moe to show him how far he strayed from his guiding principle. And it was so strong that I couldn't go back to sleep. So I got up, start writing down what I had to do. I went and looked them up and looked their guiding principle, and boy, had they really strayed away from them. So the following day, I get a call from a random stranger, never met. Someone said a pastor told him to reach out to me. And lo and behold, he does videography, political videos. And I said, hey, would you be able to do this video for me? He said, sure. So 2 days later, we film it. We do this video. It goes viral throughout the province. I have MLAs contacting me, and they're like, we know, Nadine. We just don't know how to change it. So I said, well, get Scott Moe to call me. I have plenty of ideas on how to change it. So that Friday, I received a call from the Premier, and we talked on the phone for about an hour and 15 minutes. And the only reason we cut it off is because my 12-year-old at the time was just losing her mind sitting in the car next to me. So I said, sorry, I'd love to keep chatting and tell you how to run the province, but I kind of have to go here. But it's funny, I laugh about it, but he did listen to a lot of the things we said, and it opened a line of communication. So our group ended up having a lot of influence on what happened in the province of Saskatchewan. The following week is when Scott Moe, I don't know if you guys knew, he was one of the worst for his language, for division and hate. He would say, we've had enough patience with you. We're going to make life difficult for you. Like, I remember listening to that and said, wow, that's a leader of our province. And the following week, he says, it's time we end the stigmatization of the unvaccinated. They're our family, they're our friends, not right-wing wackos. So I apparently the right-wing wacko. And that term was used in mainstream media that week. They came in hot against our organization, against me. They called me all sorts of names. They called me an extremist, misogynist, racist. They didn't know I was Métis, but that doesn't seem to matter, right? Anti-vax, alt-right. And the funny thing is the right-wing wacko or the alt-right is they didn't know I voted for Trudeau in 2015. And before you guys absolutely hate me, throw things at me, again, I'm a perfect example of people who can wake up and start seeing reality for what it is. I was one of those Canadians that didn't pay attention to politics. I was one of those Canadians that believed everything mainstream media said. And it wasn't until I moved out west. Well, no, I voted when I was out west. So you can't blame me for him getting in because my vote didn't count in Saskatchewan. So please, amnesty here, right? So yeah, it's funny because they didn't really do their homework and they didn't know we strategized 10 steps ahead with Unified Grassroots. I think that's why we're so effective. When I came out with the video that Scott Moe called me, I knew the NDP'd be watching. They really don't like me in Saskatchewan. Twitter NDP activists have made that very clear. So I knew they'd be watching, but we had already planned and had permits for an event coming up where we were doing a food and clothing drive for inner city to fill a bus of food and clothes to feed the inner city. So in the same announcement that I did to my call, about my call to Scott Moe, I announced and advertise this event. So it's so funny, you see them mainstream media, extremist organization, right-wing crazy organization, and I'm like, come to our food and clothing drive that we have next week. We're gonna take care of the people the government's failing taking care of. So it's just kind of funny. So if you're an organization that you're doing something, think 10 steps ahead. And out of that, our group grew like insane. So we had 10,000 at the time. We're now at 30,000 in the and we're still growing every single day. And we haven't lost momentum. If anything, we've built momentum. So now that you guys know that I'm an extremist, a right-wing wacko, anti-vax. Oh, I also got compared to Trump in some of those mainstream. Yeah. Because I said mainstream media is the enemy of the people. But I didn't realize that I was that controversial. But I'll take it with a badge of honor. And a white supremacist. So now that you know all of that, I'm going to give you guys tips on how to go forward, since obviously I'm someone that everyone should listen to. What can we do? Almost out of time? Okay. Oh, yeah, so that's one of the articles. I'll grab this too. So that was meant to be a hate piece. This is where they compare me to Trump. But they actually list a lot of accomplishments we've had in the province, and I consider an article to be very proud of, even though they tried to make it a hit piece. It was our biggest advertisement so far. So, mainstream media can be the enemy, but they can also be very useful if you strategize them and use them with the right way. So I purposefully would egg on Phil Tank, who's the writer of that article, on Twitter. So he became so obsessed with our organization, any opportunity he would have to write about it, he would use it. So if you think mainstream media, you should ignore them, no, just really, really make them obsessed with you. And then they'll write about you constantly. So, and then other people will find out about your organization and be like, oh, there's somewhere I can go where I'm not alone. Okay, so what can we do? Domestic abuse. I use that term because as a police officer, I've seen a lot of people stuck in a situation that they have a really hard time getting out of. Domestic abuse is one of those situations. And I always had a hard time figuring out how do we get them out. And one thing I learned is you show them how life used to be before they got into that relationship. You talk about how life used to be in the past. And you talk about tomorrow. So after they get abused, we know the situation tomorrow. There's the circle of violence, right? Is gonna come. It's gonna offer flowers. So you tell them what's coming. One of those examples when I'm dealing with the left or writing a tweet, I always think, okay, what are they going to do? Point it out in the tweet. So for example, I had said, now that I'm right wing, the left has become extremely misogynistic towards me. The hatred that I'm getting is just unreal. So I pointed out what they were going to do, and then they just started doing it right in the comments, exactly what I said what they were going to do. So it's a way of kind of making them attack less. You point out what they're going to do. And then the people in the middle that are still asleep, that are watching this happen in front of them, are like, they're starting to wake up. They're starting to see that there's a pattern here, and they're starting to make question, okay, is this who do I identify with the most? The hatefulness or someone who just wants to be left alone? So things like that. My other point is perfect. You could be the most perfect person on earth. You could do everything right, and you will still be hated by some. A perfect example of that is Jesus. He was one of the best leaders. He was, not one of, he was the best leader we've ever had as a human race. And he was hated by the extremes on both sides. He was hated by the Pharisees, and he was hated by the Romans. So when you're walking, recognize, even if you're doing everything right, there will be people that will hate you. Don't let that stop you from being bold and fearless. Anything you say, just before you type it, you will be hated by some. And consider it a good thing when that hate comes, because it means you're doing the right thing. And you're standing by your principle. History. Another way you can affect change is let people know where we failed in the past, and when we're going in the direction of failing again. So you can have conversations with people. Did you know there was a big protest in China where it lasted for several weeks? It was from April to June. Jonathan, what's the name of that protest again? Tiananmen Square. Yeah, I didn't even know about it till this week. And when you listen to it, they called it an occupation. And they enacted the War Measures Act, or what would have been a War Measures Act at the time. They trampled protesters with tanks. And if you know your history, you can start nudging people and say, hey, I know it's not apples to apples here, it's not as bad as this, but it does have a lot of similarities. Did you agree with that one? Why are you agreeing with this one? So know your history. Go back and look. If you're looking at ideas on how to bring on solution, go back and look at ideas that work. Martin Luther King, Gandhi, all of that. That'll spark some ideas of what to do going forward. Money. Put your money where your mouth is. I always say in our group, I don't ask for money, but sometimes I'll say, stop complaining until you're willing to do something about it. If you're someone who has money, then look at using it to fight the cause. Don't just complain and complain and complain. A perfect example of this, where it might be like $5 where you can make a change. We've talked about the court system and how it's completely corrupt. We've completely lost them. They've done judicial notice, which basically they've deemed the vaccine safe and effective without seeing any evidence of it. It's basically, it's judicial notice is the same as the sun sets at night and rises in the morning. That's judicial notice. They did the same thing with the vaccine. How we can expose that is to show how much the public has lost trust into our court system right now. The court system holds as a very, very high value public trust. So a simple solution to that, fund a poll that goes across Canada that shows how much Canadians have lost trust into our court system. That poll might cost $5,000. But if you show that to every court officer, every lawyer, every judge in the country, they're going to start realizing that they're losing the system. So that's another idea of where you can put money, or GCCF, or Danny when he puts on stuff like this. Am I getting close to my time? Sorry, I got really good ideas. I've got 4 more. Is that okay? A minute, okay. I'll skip that one. Humor. Humor is a way to connect people and to bring people together, so we need more of it. I'm going to go really fast because some are really good. Christmas dinner. The title of family yesterday gave me a huge idea. At Christmas dinner, we don't always get along with everyone in our family, and sometimes the conversation can get a bit heated during dinner. How do you fix it? You suggest board games, and then you stop talking about the politics and you start realizing how much fun you can have together even when your ideas don't always match. We need more ideas like that to bring people together, and using the family as an example of how you do that would be one of the greatest thing to look to fixing this problem. You will find what you're looking for. If you're looking for despair, if you're looking for everything that's wrong in the world, that's what you're going to find. You want a solutions change? Start looking for solution and change. You want hope? Start looking for hope. It's so easy for us to just focus on the negative, focus on what's not working. But if you start looking at the opposite, you'll start finding the opposite and start spreading that. There are people out there who lead groups that is just focusing on the negative, the world is ending. But that doesn't bring on positive change. If anything, it just brings us into like a spiral downwards where we're not necessarily going to find a solution that works. And then the last thing, humble yourself. This is something I have a really, that I need to work on every single day. Recognize your strength and your weaknesses in your groups. And when you do recognize them, don't feel like you have to take credit for everything. If somebody else takes your ideas and goes with it and does an amazing job, celebrate that person. Because the greater purpose is bringing change within Canada, not bettering yourself or who you are as a person, or you're the savior. It's saving Canada. Anyways, wonderful. Sorry.
No, that's good. Don't be sorry. Don't be sorry.
Yeah.
That was wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Sorry, I went over.
No, that's fine. And I'm going to ask the first question in the question period. I'm going to ask you what was the good idea you skipped over, so make a note of it. But in any event, thank you very much. And we are staying on schedule, but Nadine talks about like taking it to them. Derek Sloan was a good example of that on abortion. Like Andrew Scheer, they asked him all during the campaign, every time the reporters saw them, they asked about abortion, and he would turn red like he'd got caught smoking behind the barn. And Derek said, the first time they asked him about abortion, he said, you know they kill the babies and sell the body parts, don't you? I'm against it. And he said, they asked him that about twice, and then they stopped asking him about abortion because it didn't make a very good clip for the late news. But in any event, you've always got a good clip for the late news. Here's one of our favorite speakers, Michelle Stirling. I think it's called Making Kids Feel Guilty, but I don't know what she's talking about. So here, come on, Michelle, let's have at it. You want the microphone up on here? Yes, thank you. There we are, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Yes, what is it called? It's called Stop Scaring Children on Climate Change. Can we have the first slide, please? Great, thank you. I do want to just issue a warning. I know there are some little people here in the room. It's wonderful to see children, but I'm going to be saying some things that are pretty terrible because of this person that I'm critiquing their writing, and I don't know if you want your kids to hear this. And I also know that some people have had tragedies in the past year. I will be mentioning suicide. So if you feel that that would be uncomfortable or inappropriate for young children to hear what I'm going to say, then you might want to step out. Okay. So I'll just start now because I don't get to that part for a couple of minutes. So humans are highly suggestible, and that's why hypnosis, advertising, and such like works, and also why mass formation psychosis happens. And unfortunately, in the world of climate, doomsday is every day. So these people have been running in and out of schools, telling kids that you're all going to die in the next few years, and they show them a countdown clock. And of course, children have been weaponized. Dr. Suzuki's daughter is the first girl we see there. She spoke at the 1992 Rio conference. The Greenpeace Angry Kid video is that little fellow who looks really angry. It's from 2009. It's still online. It's horrifying what he says. And it's really Maoist tactics, turning kids against parents. And Greta was foisted on us by the World Economic Forum. She did exist before that, but they really gave her prominence. And how did we come up with this line, "Our house is on fire"? Well, there's a clinical psychologist using healing tactics to scare you into compliance on climate. This woman, Margaret Klein Solomon, is the one who came up with this climate emergency, "Our house is on fire." And she also wrote this book, Facing the Climate Emergency. There's a lot of material that's out there. This one is called Under the Weather. It's a very sad story about how people have become so depressed about something that hasn't happened yet and probably won't happen. Literally making yourself sick with maudlin climate brooding. And this is about people in university. One fellow was just so much in despair that he just dropped out of university and kind of wandered away. Years later, he got married and had 2 kids, got a house, and was much happier. and this other friend of his didn't like that, and he writes in here about solastalgia, about Latin solus, which means abandonment and loneliness, and nostalgia, about losing the earth that we haven't lost yet and maybe never will. And this fellow who got married and had the 2 kids became a professor. And then at school, last year, he informed his ethics class that the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was 400 parts per million, and there was no hope of getting it back down to 350. And in the back of the class, a student started crying, saying, "If I didn't have hope, how could I live?" she asked. And he had an urge to say, "Exactly." But he felt bad about making her cry. Meantime, the author of this article says he has pre-TSD. So he has post-traumatic stress disorder, but in advance of the collapse of the world, over things that have not happened yet. So society is self-destructing. This poster says the most loving gift you can give your first child is to not have another. Now, what's the impact on a child's psyche being exposed to this kind of messaging? Which one of us should not be here? Is my existence really killing the planet? I mean, what do you think runs through the minds of kids when they hear stuff like that? Well, now I'm going to give you my rant. I know John Robson had a chance to rant quite a bit, but I'm going to do my own. This is something I wrote in 2018. And it's a rebuttal to Roy Scranton's climate change daughter dystopia. He is a professor in the United States, an author. He writes these cheery books, Learning to Die in the Anthropocene. We're doomed, now what? I will say he is an American war vet, so that may have shaded his worldview. And the thing that he wrote was about the birth of his daughter, and he's referring to a paper that was published about the same time by two researchers called Wines and Nicholas. And what he wrote is triggering and disgusting, especially as he did no due diligence on their claims. So when you hear the disgusting things that he wrote that I'm going to repeat, remember that it's all BS. Don't accept it. So on July 16th, 2018, in the New York Times, Roy Scranton introduced a new form of child abuse to the world in the form of an article on climate change birth regret. He tells us that he cried when his bundle of joy was born, and then in sorrow because he and his partner had doomed their baby to a life on a dystopian planet. Roy, welcome to life. Aside from having forever tagged his daughter with his morbid, self-absorbed monologue of wildly exaggerated climate hysteria, Roy winds it up even more, saying, "Some people say the mistake was having a child in the first place." She's going to feel good about that, Roy. Every time she succeeds at something, her first step, her first word, her first dance, her math competition, her graduation, and you say, "Congratulations," she'll have to wonder, does my daddy mean that, or am I just a mistake of my parents' selfishness? He's just trying to make me feel good, because my dad wrote an article in the New York Times about welcoming me into the world and said, indeed, taking Wines and Nicholas's arguments seriously would mean acknowledging that the only moral response to global climate change is to commit suicide. What? Engaging in speculative realism, Scranton drags us through a dark vision of the future, but one that rests entirely on science fiction. And who am I to say that? Well, I'm a critical thinker. I work with many climate scientists and professional engineers. I've interviewed numerous people in the field of climate science and policy. I've read a very broad range of academic literature on the subject. I've written several papers related to the psychology of the alleged 97% consensus. When people tell me apocalyptic things, I investigate to see if it's true. Usually, it's not. I'm a fan of history. And I've read a great deal about early warm and cold periods and how dystopian life was pre-fossil fuels. In fact, chances would have been good that Roy's daughter or childbearer might not have survived the birth back then. But let's not quibble about reality. Let's deconstruct Roy's science fiction. And ask me about my t-shirt after. This is 2,000 years of global warming and cooling. It's cyclical. It's not you. It's not CO2. So Roy leans very heavily on his childbearer's regret by referencing the work of Wines and Nicholas, a widely cited paper published in the open access option of IOP. First of all, this is a paid-to-publish article. Effectively, that means it's paid advertorial, and because it's not behind a paywall, everyone can download it. And of course, because it has controversial ideas in it, it became a very cited article. Like ideas like personal planet-saving concept, have one less child, don't have a car, don't fly, eat plants. Well, rather than regretting that he had a child, regretting having a daughter, no less, a woman capable of creating even more carbon-based life forms, let's hope Roy gets on with teaching her some critical thinking skills. For instance, let's look at just one fragment of Wines and Nicholas' paper. They write, "We recommend 4 widely applicable, high-impact, low-emissions actions with the potential to contribute to systemic change and substantially reduce annual personal emissions. Having one fewer child, an average of, for developed countries, of 56.8 tons of CO2 equivalent emissions reduction per year." So now you're just a carbon footprint, people. living a car-free life, 2.4 tons CO2 equivalent saved every year. Avoiding plane travel, 1.6 tons CO2e saved per trip, per round-trip transatlantic flight. And eating a plant-based diet, 0.8 tons CO2e saved per year. Well, let's have a look at these quote-unquote facts. Wines is a grad student at the University of British Columbia. Vancouver gets some 70% of its fruits and vegetables from California. California currently supplies about 70% of all of BC's imported fruits and vegetables, yet California's main agricultural region has faced a number of significant climate-related challenges. So these fresh fruits and vegetables come in by just-in-time fossil-fueled transportation. So these authors are advising people to use more fossil fuels in order to eat plants that are grown with the help of often illegal labor in a desert that's mostly maxed out of water. How's that for convoluted climate justice? Roy, are you aware that the land subsidence in California's San Joaquin Valley is some 28.5 feet or 8.5 meters due to groundwater withdrawals? Most of this is for agriculture. And some agricultural suppliers in California are now turning to Mexico to meet supply, which is even farther away. Are you aware that in the space of a single decade, Californians created the largest single-point source of alkaline dust by diverting the tributaries of the Owens Lake and turning it into a desert? This was a lake that had been in existence for 850,000 years. Humans did that through ignorance at the time and stupidity, but not climate change. Roy, California is effectively a desert, Roy. It's one that experienced 100 and 200-year droughts during the medieval warm period. Do you think it wise to push the limits of such fragile land just to be sure that people in Vancouver can go vegan and save the planet? Is it not odd that the authors proposing these sweeping societal changes and the incorporation of these 4 pillars into school curriculums failed to consider these facts? Roy, the real threat here is that someone might take Wines and Nicholas seriously and start teaching their 4 principles to your daughter. Well, that's why you need to teach her to thinking critically about these issues and not to think regretfully about being alive. In Vancouver, where author Wines studies, it's a port city with Canada's largest port and most diversified in North America. Just 16 container ships emit the equivalent noxious emissions of all the cars in the world. So not having your daughter would not have made a difference to save the planet. Rejoice in your daughter, Roy. Rejoice. And how about co-author Nicholas from Lund University in Sweden? As with Vancouver, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization reported that for the approximately 9 million Swedes, for fresh fruit and vegetables, the import share is over 70%. These crazy Swedes are importing bananas from the Dominican Republic 8,139 kilometers away. Citrus fruits come from Italy, Spain, and Israel. And get this, Sweden is also a relatively large importer of kiwi fruit, all of which comes from Italy or New Zealand. New Zealand, 10,760 miles or 17,316 kilometers by air. Yes, yes. Eat your fruits and vegetables. Save the planet. But really, Roy, you should not worry about this GHG travel baggage that goes with your planet-saving fruits and vegetables, because the moral philosopher of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, John Broome, informs us that to fight climate change, the IPCC finds it necessary to hold meetings in remote corners of the world. Look at all the grand places this moral planet saver has been to. I've been to IPCC meetings in Lima, Changwon in South Korea, Wellington and Addis Ababa. In Europe, the IPCC has taken me to Vigo, to Geneva, Oslo, Utrecht, Berlin and Potsdam, Kuala Lumpur and Copenhagen are still to come. I hope the other authors offset the emissions caused by their travels to these meetings. I'm pleased to say that the British government offsets mine. All this traveling is not much fun. The IPCC work is relentless, and I've had little time to enjoy all the places I've been to. Aw, too bad he didn't have any fun. Work, work, work. Well, I wonder who gets rich on all those offsets. Just imagine. Wired reported that the Paris COP21 event attendees emitted some 300,000 tons of CO2 just getting there. And so let's see, 300,000 times $30 a ton, or what, 9 million bucks? Of course, that pales when compared to the info in a 2007 Baker McKenzie New Zealand law firm PowerPoint that stated the World Bank and an unnamed private fund had made $1.2 billion in 23 minutes trading certified emissions reduction credits on the pollution from a Chinese factory via the UN Clean Development Mechanism. And Interpol's Guide to Carbon Trading Crime reported that sometimes, in some carbon trading contexts, emissions are upped just so that people make more money. Remember to teach your daughter, Roy, that the carbon market is based on the lack of delivery of an invisible substance to no one. And oddly, none of these planet savers seem keen to take your advice, Roy, which is, if you really want to save the planet, you should die. Roy, are you starting to get the picture? While humans do affect the planet, and human activities do affect climate change somewhat, there's little evidence that human carbon dioxide emissions are catastrophically going to end it all for us. Those predictions are based on climate-modeled simulations. A cyber version of your dystopian fantasies. Roy Freeman Dyson, renowned physicist, says that climate models are very good at helping to understand climate change, but very poor at predicting climate change. And for Canadians, immigration makes meeting climate targets impossible. They're actually planning to bring 63 million people to Canada. Dr. Judith Curry testified to the U.S. Senate after the last IPCC AR5 report that the case for human-caused global warming is weakened, and carbon dioxide is not a control knob that can fine-tune climate. In fact, it's far more likely that the carbon baggers are damaging the world in a serious way with the toxic processes and unrecyclable remains of ineffective wind and solar farms that need natural gas backup anyway. So why build the wind and solar farms in the first place? Oh, right. They generate the tradable renewable energy certificates for the green billionaires. And those, oops, that's in the wrong place. Could you go forward one? Yeah. And Roy, these same billionaires are funding environmental groups worldwide to create the kind of dystopian fears that you dwell on, so that ordinary people like you and your daughter will comply, without question, with these nonsensical climate and energy policies that make them rich. So that's what you need to teach your daughter, Roy. Teach her to question. Teach her to think critically. Teach her to follow the money. Teach her that if people tell you that you should die to save the planet, tell them you first. Teach her to be a geologist. Set a little perspective on climate change throughout time. Roy, you have a daughter. You have a miracle before you. You have one you can hold in your hands and love, a tiny little thing that appeared because of a statistically ridiculous chance that your partner's egg and one of your sperm connected, sparked, and became life a human being. For God's sake, man, abandon these end is nigh prophets who can't think critically, but can give you truckloads of useless, sometimes fatal misinformation and advice that serves their bizarre ideologies or commercial agendas and makes you think death might be preferable than loving life and your own daughter. If you really want to save the planet, Roy, you should live joyfully every minute of the day. We are not in the Anthropocene. We are in the Meghalian. Society did collapse in this 4,200-year period of time, but it was due to a mega drought and cooling, completely unrelated to the human use of fossil fuels. Revel in your good fortune to live in a time and place where childbirth mortality is so low. Resist the urge to sacrifice your daughter in cyberspace, worshiping a modern-day Ugaritic weather god Baal. Choose life, Roy. Be filled with gratitude that you are not one of millions of families grieving a miscarriage, a stillbirth, a neonatal death. I can guarantee you that not one of them ever said, "We saved the planet," upon being told your baby is dead. Roy, be grateful for your miracle and stop being an ass about this climate change dystopia and your infant daughter. Just stop. So, to try and stop this climate tyranny, we've put together some lighthearted little videos that people could watch with their kids and maybe help them calm down and have a better perspective on climate change. And now I have something that's a bit more cheerful, and I think it fits the theme. If you could roll Changing Your Mind.
La na la na 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 la na 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 na. Hey you, find out what's really true. Climate's always changing now and forevermore. So be no one's fool. Your question is cool. Oh yeah. So be on the right team. Don't go with the mainstream. Hey, when searching the truth, changing your mind and be that one for that future. Hey, hey, you can change your mind and find out what's really going on. Hey, and we'll be fine. Don't swim in the sea of confusion. Hey, hey, so don't be scared. Doomsday just an illusion. Hey, hey, la na na na, la na 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 na, la na na na, la na na na, na na na. Hey you, find out what's really true. You stay safe when you start running your own brain. So see the light, the future is bright. Oh yeah, tables are turning, you gotta keep learning. Hey, so take the fight, changing your mind and be the one for the future. Hey, hey, you can change your mind and find out what's really going on. Hey, we'll be just fine. Don't swim in the sea of confusion. Hey, hey, so don't be scared. Doomsday's just an illusion. Hey, hey, la na na na, la na 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 na, la na na na.
Thank you.
I'm almost speechless, which is pretty rare for me, but anyway, as Michelle was talking about the vegans, I can't help but thinking of a Gary Larson cartoon where there's two cavemen, they're cooking, some meat on a stick over a campfire, and the caveman saying to his friend, he said, I don't understand it. He said, everything we eat's organic, and yet our life expectancy is only 29. And so it's sort of a strange world, isn't it? What a strange world. So I guess it's lunchtime, and then we'll again, as I say, we have a few things to say to honor Tim Ball and Kevin Avram at noon, and then we'll have the question and answer from these last three speakers. And so, since I haven't asked anyone else to ask the blessing before lunch, and since I'm up here already, how about if I just ask the blessing for lunch, and then we'll have lunch. Lord, we thank you for all the blessings in our life, and we thank you for family, friends, and freedom, and particularly we thank you for the family and friends here in the room today and watching us online. We just ask you to bless our time together, both now and in the future, and bless this food to our use and us to thy service. Amen. Lunch is on. Thank you, everyone.